Hello everyone. This is the third video for the good people of Unity of Mesa. Okay, so today what I want to do is I want us to look at how do we build an identity and maintain it. In previous videos and in the book too, I talked about this thing that I call suffering, which is essentially the experience of being separate from ourselves. Well, how are we separate from ourselves? Well, in order to be separate from ourselves, we have to be a person. We have to be a somebody that is separate from life. We have to be an identity. Okay? So this thing that's in our minds that I call conditioned mind, its job is to continually, every moment of every day, if possible, take us out of the place where we're just authentically living, where we're just in the flow of life and just being who we are, who we really are, and keep us in a state where we're identified with a self that is separate from life and suffer. Okay? All right, so how do we do that? Okay, so imagine that I'm conditioned mind, right? And my job is I've got this human, people call him Dave, and so my job is to keep this human from being himself. Okay, how am I going to do that? Well, first thing I got to do is I have to have some kind of access to him, because as conditioned mind, I'm actually imaginary, right? I don't exist. I don't have a body. I don't live in any kind of physical reality at all. I'm just made up. I'm a made up construct, basically. And the construct, we made this up as a species in order to help us to survive. And I don't have space in this video to go into why, but just kind of take that on faith if you don't mind. It's a survival system. And we, as a species, have learned how to survive in this world that we live in. And each of us as individuals have learned how to survive within our family unit and within the culture that we live in. And the way that we survive is we become a self who is surviving. Okay? All right. So anyway, my job as conditioned mind is to get this person to be identified with a self. And but I am not real. So how am I going to do that? Well, the way that I have a connection with this person is through language. And so I am there inside this person's mind. We'll call it a him. It could be him or her, of course, but in my case, it's a him. So I'm in his mind. And I'm going to talk to him in his mind. So I'm going to be talking to him about what's going on and telling him what he thinks about that and how he feels about that and what he should be doing and stuff like that, right? And in that gives me access to this human and gives me a relationship with him, right? Okay, now what am I going to talk to him about? Well, I'm going to talk to him about him and about the world, and I'm going to put a spin on it that is negative, or at least ends up being negative. I also could be putting positive stuff on there. I could be telling him how great he is and stuff like that, how wonderful life is, but I'm doing that as a setup for the negative. Sooner or later it's going to come down to a negative, and the conversation is going to be about how he's not the person he should be, the world's not the way it should be, he's not happy, he doesn't have what he wants, stuff like that. So I basically am going to tell him a story, or it's actually a series of stories, a collection of stories. And that the point of those stories is to get him to move out of the world that we actually live in, which is beautiful, harmonious, exquisite, and where there's nothing wrong and there's no suffering. I need to move him out of that world into a fictional world where everything's wrong, he's wrong, the fact that his needs aren't being met in this life is his fault, instead of it being actually my fault, his conditioned mind, because that's where the fault actually lies. I'm actually talking him into an existence where his needs are not being met. So I'm talking him into that. And so the purpose of the stories is to create a fictional reality for this self to live in. You could sort of think about it as like a fable, or like a fairy tale. And so we need a hero. There's a hero in the fairy tale. It's sort of a tragic hero in this case, but the self is the person who's living inside that fantasy, who's living inside that story. Okay. Okay. Now, well, where am I coming up with all this stuff that I'm making these stories out of? Well, it's coming out of the beliefs and assumptions that this person was given as a child, this human. And that's what happened to all of us, right? We were born and we had no idea of anything, what was going on. And we were taught how to live in this world. And we were taught to believe certain things. So I was taught to believe all kinds of stuff about me, which I'll go into a little bit later. And some of those things already from the book. So I was taught all kinds of things about me. I was taught all kinds of things about the world. The world's, according to what I was taught, a scary place. You got to watch out for yourself, like that. Okay, so there's these beliefs and assumptions that we all were given when we were children. And those beliefs and assumptions, they're fictional. They have nothing to do with reality. They have everything to do with what we need, the information we need to have in our minds in order to fit into the world and function in the world. But they have nothing to do with reality, okay? So they're all made up, they're fictional. And so because they're fictional, this authentic human who I am actually, if I'm going around just being me, that stuff is never going to occur to me. It's never going to occur to me that there's something wrong with me, because it's absurd, right? I mean, look at that for yourself, right? Isn't that absurd? I mean, because you have that belief too, I'll offer. You can look to see if that's your experience. But we all have the belief that there's something wrong with us, because that's a fundamental piece of the conditioned system. But it's completely bogus in every case. And certainly in my case, and I can guarantee in yours too. It's just a fiction we're taught to believe in that helps us to stay fixated on this artificial world that we're supposed to believe in, that is what our culture believes in, so that we can fit into our culture and function in our culture in the way that we need to in order to survive. Okay? So we've got self-talk. We've got the conversation happening in conditioned mind. Conditioned mind is talking to us all the time. We've got these stories, these elaborate fictions, fairy tales that are being woven inside our minds to cause us to live in a reality that is not actually here, a fictional reality. And those stories are founded on beliefs. Okay, so what's the next step? What else do I have to do? Because that in itself is not enough. I need something that's going to make all this stuff that I'm telling these humans seem totally real. Okay. Well, the next thing is that I'm going to convince this human, and we've all been convinced of this, that everything that he sees out there is real. I'm going to get him to project those beliefs onto the world and assume that what he's seeing out there is actually what's going on in here. Okay? So let's say, for example, that my human, and this is the case in my case, he believes that he's not good enough. He's people, or maybe to make it more simple, that people don't like him. Okay? People just don't they don't like me, says conditioned mind, right? That's what I'm saying to him. People don't like you. Okay? And so the human is there, oh, people don't like me. And so when he looks out, what he's seeing is that people don't like him. Now, is it true that people don't like him? No. I mean, maybe every once in a while somebody might not like him because that's something that happens. But in general, like in my case, no, people tended to like me. But I didn't see it. I couldn't see that because conditioned mind is back there telling me that people don't like me. And so I'm projecting that out onto the world. So what I see is that people don't like me. And so think about that. That creates an airtight container because I've got all this stuff going on in my mind that is totally bogus. And I'm looking out at the world, and it seems like everything in my experience is confirming that because I don't know that I'm projecting it. I just think that what I'm seeing out there is real. All right? So I'm going fairly quickly through these things. I mean, we could spend videos on each of these, and it's elaborated more in the book. So all the stuff is in more detail in the book. This is sort of a summary that I'm doing. All right, so we've got a pretty good package here, all right? And that's what we call identity. So I'm living in this, I've got my human living in this world where he is completely encapsulated by his own beliefs about the way things are. And those beliefs are continually being maintained by the conversation in his mind, by what I'm telling him. And it's hard to catch on to the conversation because I'm doing it in two ways. I'm using the second person, so I'm using you. So I'm saying, there's something wrong with you. And I'm also using the first person. Even though it's me, even though it's not him thinking, actually, this is conditioned mind. It's me, conditioned mind, talking to him. I'm using the first person. So, people don't like me. There's something wrong with me. my life isn't working, this kind of thing. And so it's really hard to the fact, from my point of view, that most of what's going on in our minds is not this person, this authentic person thinking. Most of what's going on is the conditioned mind talking to the human. Okay? And then to make it very complex, and I'm not going to go into this at this point, but it's all in the book, there's more than one identity. So sometimes I'm one person, sometimes I'm another person, another time I'm another person. Right? And each of those different people inside of me has its own stories and its own projections and its own beliefs that are different from the other ones. So it makes it really, really difficult to catch on to. And for me, a lot of what spiritual practice is all about is learning how to see through all of this and see all of our different identities and how they're put together. Because if I can see it, it's designed to be in here. I'm supposed to be inside of it, not aware of it. And if I'm inside of it and not aware of it, I'm identified with it. But what we can do with practice is we can learn how to be aware of these things. And if I become aware of it, then it moves from in here out to here. And then I can see it. And now I can choose to not be it. I can choose to not be that person who I was taught to be. And instead, I can choose to be myself, my authentic self. Okay? It takes a lot of practice to have the level of awareness to be able to do that, but it can absolutely be done. Okay. So I want to use a little example. I noticed there's some light coming up. Forgive me if there's a light on my face. So I'm going to use an example. And so here's the one I was thinking about, like, what would be fun to do. And I was thinking about, being a young man before I went to the monastery and how I suffered. And the way that I suffered most hideously, I suffered in everything, but the way I suffered most hideously was in relationships with women. So I thought it would be fun to look at, so how was identity created and maintained in relationships with women? Okay, so here I go. Here is Dave in relationship. All right. So I don't have to be Dave in relationship. And when I say Dave now, I mean Dave the identity. Okay, because I've learned since then, after all the training and practice I've done, I can be absolutely authentic with people in any kind of relationship. I can just be me, and I don't have to be a separate self in relationship. Okay. But back then, I had no idea of any of this, and so I was Dave all the time in relationship. So how's that go? So here goes Dave, and Dave's going along through life, and he meets a woman that he's attracted to. Okay, so what happens? So first thing happens is here comes conditioned mind, and conditioned mind is saying, wow, she's amazing. She's really cute. Boy, I really want to be with her. Stuff like that. And so that kind of gets me into a place of, just openness and and excitement about it. And then maybe I start to engage with her, and as soon as I start to engage with her, conditioned mind, again, we got to have a conversation. This is how it's talking me into being Dave. So conditioned mind, it then starts saying, well, she's going to find out who you really are, and who you really are. Once she finds out who you really are, then she's not going to think that you're cool. She's not going to like you, and other stuff like that. And what it's doing is it's starting to create a self-consciousness in me. And this happened, over and over and over and over again. Whenever I would try to engage with women, then, it would start off pretty well, actually. But then pretty soon, conditioned mind would come in, start telling me, what a loser I am, and how she couldn't possibly be interested in me. And in most cases, that was the end of it. Because then I would just believe that, because I had no idea that was conditioned mind talking to me. And I would just believe it. And I would go, oh, okay, yeah, you're right. Yeah, that's, she's too good for me. I'm not even going to try. Okay. But let's say, and this did happen every once in a while, let's say that the woman was tenacious enough to hang in there through me, through all that self-doubt, and we actually ended up with some kind of relationship. All right. So what happened then? Well, for a while, conditioned mind would head down the same track. You're no good. She doesn't like you. Maybe she would make some kind of ambiguous facial expression. See, look, that means she doesn't like you, or she's not into you, or she's catching on to what a loser you are. So that would go on for a while, and again, that's creating an identity. That's creating a me who is not okay, who feels self-conscious and inadequate. But then let's say she was really tenacious, and there were a few of those, and she was really tenacious, and she managed to hang on through all that too, and still wanted to be in a relationship with me. And it's, looking back, it's understandable why she would, because the reality was, I was a perfectly good person. I was kind, even back then, even before training. I was kind and open and loving, and, I was kind of a good guy to be around. It's fun too, in some ways. And so, yeah, I mean, she was trying to hang out through all of my self-doubt and all of this internal dialogue that was attempting to pull me away from her in order to have some kind of relationship with me. Okay, so let's say she hung out there for a while. What would conditioned mind do then? Because if it stops at this point, and I actually allow myself to connect with this woman and love her and be loved by her, then I'm not going to suffer, and I'm just going to fall into my authentic nature, and that's no good. We can't allow that to happen. So what is it going to do? Well, then it would come along, and it would start to talk about how, well, I don't really want this relationship. She's not that cool. This really isn't what I really want. What I really want is to be by myself. I want to go, I want to be able to do what I want to all the time. I don't like having to compromise, blah, 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 blah. Right? So it would take a completely different tact and create a completely different identity in me. Now I'm no longer the loser who really wants to be in a relationship with this woman. Now I'm this loner kind of rebel who doesn't really care about her anymore and just wants to be by himself. Do you see how that works? And so underneath that, there's these beliefs that are being maintained about who I am, but they shift and they change. And so, and inevitably what would happen is that I would end up breaking up with this person, even though she's a perfectly good person. And without conditioned mind, we could have probably had a really good relationship. Okay? So it's not a happy story. It happened any number of times when I was younger. The happy part of the story is that it's completely unnecessary. And that, like I said, I've learned through my experience that a person, this person even, can be in relationships of all kinds, including relationships, intimate relationships, in a way that is open and loving and authentic. Okay? So there you go. So there's how to create and maintain an identity. All right. So now for your discussion question. So what I'd like for you to do is to ask yourself, and it would be handy, if possible, to have a pen and piece of paper like we had last time, to maybe spend some time just working this out, because it's a little bit complex. So use pen and paper to just kind of see, to work this out for yourself. Well, what I want you to do is see what you see at this point about your equivalent of Dave. So the identity who you most believe in, okay? And look at, so what is that? What is the self-talk that goes around that? What do you believe when you're that identity? What are some of the stories that you believe? And particularly you're looking for, not necessarily completely, but mostly for unhappy stories that are creating a me who is unhappy in some way and who is suffering in some way. Consider what are the beliefs that are underpinning those stories. Okay, and consider what do you tend to project, or another way of saying it is, what is the world that you create to live in through your projections? Like for me, for example, I created a world where I wasn't liked. People didn't care about me. What kind of world do you create? Okay, so take a few minutes maybe, and just kind of work that out and see what you can see at this point, knowing that as you go along and continue to do this work and practice with this, you'll see more. And then have a conversation about that. And then for your, and you might want to pause the video at this point, up to you, have that discussion and come back, but I'm going to give the homework assignment. So for the next week, continue what you've been doing. Continue your meditation practice, continue practicing with your attention, because that's the foundation of the work, is we're learning how to be here and bring our attention back to the moment over and over and over again. So continue doing that, and now expand your awareness to include identity. And as you go through life, whenever you can remember it, ask yourself, who's here right now? Am I here? My authentic self, am I here? Or am I an identity? Am I the self I was taught to be? And you can tell if you're the self that you're taught to be because you're not connected in some way, or you're unhappy in some way, or you feel self-conscious. That's a big sign of it. So just see if you can catch yourself not being who you really are. And whenever you catch yourself not being who you really are, just look. Don't try to fix it or change it or anything, but just look to see, what is that? Who is this person? Who do I believe myself to be that I actually am not? And consider, well, if I'm not that person, then who am I really? Okay? All right, good. Thank you very much. I hope you have a good discussion and a good week, and I will look forward to talking with you next week. Take care.